Hello, Psych students. Mr. G here with our next lesson. This is at a unit 6 now, and this will be covering our first topic, which is going to be dealing with learning, particularly what we would call classical and operant conditioning. The question is, can behavior be shaped or changed? And so we're going to investigate that now. So, without further ado, I think we've all been conditioned when you see something delicious, maybe for some of you looking at this sandwich with egg and cheese and bacon, maybe even some sausage thrown into there. Maybe that doesn't make your mouth water. I don't know, for some reason my mouth is actually watering as I'm looking at this, and it's like because when you get ready to eat, your mouth waters so that when the food gets in, it can be easily broken down with your saliva, right? And get down your throat easier, right? And so it's like when you're seeing something like this, even though it's virtual, and I can't really touch it, there's something in that makes you hungry to look at it, and it causes that reaction. So the stimulus being the food, and then the reaction would be the salivation that you get, or looking at this delicious pepperoni pizza, right? Or for some of you, it might be you maybe you have more of a sweet tooth, and it's seeing this delicious mint chocolate chip ice cream on a waffle cone with a little bit of some fudge around the tip of that waffle cone there. That looks delicious, doesn't it? Maybe not for you, but for me it does. All right, so again, I was asking that, and there's a video that you're going to see in class how food companies or other companies and anybody that's selling food, how they will try to make food look better than it actually is. Now, I would probably tell you going back to this, these are legit real. Maybe this one not, because I think that one's from an advertisement. That one is most certainly real, and that one is. That one may have had some doctoring up a little bit. And the video that we'll be watching actually explains how they do that. Now, I would probably say within the last few years, would not be surprised any type of food advertisements are probably being made by AI now. They don't even need to, in some cases, do some of the things that they do in these videos. They might be still, but I think AI might be doing a lot of it now. That's just what I'm thinking. But anyway, so let's get into the learning and conditioning. Again, what you saw happening, your body is a sense learned through certain responses, right? Through stimulus to react certain ways when you see food or in any type of advertisement, right? But learning, or what we would call conditioning, is a relatively permanent change in your behavior resulting from experience or even practice. And behavioralists, or what we would call behavioral psychologists, a lot of them are learning theorists, right? Um, will combine this with what we call the cognitive perspective of psychology. And but a lot of them rejected that and said, really, a lot of what we do, it's all learned behaviors, has nothing to do with cognition. So that's a debate that does go on within some of the learning spectrums of psychology. And I would tell you, both the cognitive psychologists as well as the behavioralists totally rejected Freud's view of the unconscious mind being involved in the learning of certain behaviors and so on. John Locke, a famous political scientist of the 16 and the 1700s, he actually theorized that we're kind of born with a blank slate, and it's all about nurture and environment to make us act a certain way or to build behaviors and learning in us that really nature has nothing to do with it. So that's where a lot of behavioralists come in and say that, yeah, there could be some things that are inborn in us to make us act a certain way instinctually, but they would believe most of what we do behavioral wise are learned. It's learned through something. And one of the most famous of these was John B. Watson. founder of behavioral psychology. And one of his famous quotes on this was, "Give me a dozen infants, well formed and my own specific world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him or her to become any type of specialist I might select them to do. I'll form them, I could form them to be a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, a merchant, and yes, even a beggar man and a thief, regardless of their talents or the race of his ancestors. I can form their behavior." I mean, today that would come across as like mind control type things, and kind of unethical, right? But I guess he was trying to prove a point that in psychology, he believed everything was caused by behavioral shape, if you will. So, Ivan Pavlov was another of these behavioral psychologists, and he was a Russian, of course, lived during the early days of communism taking over Russia. And he's the one who worked with the dogs that you may have heard famously. He looks like a Ivan Pavlov with a beard and everything. But he actually said learning is basically taking a neutral stimulus, one that would evoke no special response except to call attention to it. And if you link that to another stimulus, it could elicit a natural or involuntary response. And he called this associative learning. So, for instance, he'll take dogs, right, to associate one thing with another when the sight or smell of food was involved. And so in this case, he trained a dog to salivate at the sound of a bell or even a tuning fork, right? Rather than salivate at the sight of food. Now, of course, initially he paired it, the salivation with actually seeing the food and playing the bell. Okay. And so for a while, the dog is like, wow, hearing the bell or hearing the tuning fork going, right? And he's like, what? And the dog's learning, oh, that means I'm going to eat right now, and the dog will begin to salivate. And then you'll see what eventually he does. He takes away the food, but the dog for a while will still salivate at the sound ding 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 of the bell or the tuning fork. Um, you'll see this kind of played out a little bit when we watch a clip of The Office, the famous scene where Jim classically conditions one of his coworkers, Dwight, to want a mint by making a bell sound with his computer. So you'll see that when we do this in class and in this video clip here. All right, so the premise behind classical conditioning. So basically, what you see Pavlov was doing here is behavior can be modified or learned through a stimulus and a response. So stimulus response learning. So now another thing he actually did as well, is the guy coming in to bring the food or whatever, he actually was wearing a white lab coat. And so bringing in the food, guy with a white lab coat, dog gets very excited, salivates, right? And so he noticed that, oh, wow, it's very interesting. Even when the guy with the white lab coat would come in and not have food with him, the dog was still getting really excited and salivating. So the dog was smart enough to actually learn, that, hey, I'm going to get food because just when I see the guy with the white lab coat, and the white guy with the white lab coat wouldn't even have food at times, but he was like, the dog's associating here, and we're even like that, of course, how Pavlov was saying. So here's like a graphic to kind of show you another thing that he conditioned the dog with to get food, and it was the use of a tuning fork. Now, again, the idea here is, and I'm going to show you a couple things here. So, an unconditioned stimulus is food, of course, in their mouth, and of course, an unconditioned response would usually be, you know, salivation. right? Now, he introduces what we will call a neutral stimulus, something that normally wouldn't cause salivation for the dog, the tuning fork. Now, he'll pair them together, the neutral stimulus, the tone of the tuning fork, with food. The dog salivates. And he'll do this together for a while, right? He repeatedly presents the two together. And that for a while will happen is he'll take away the food and then come in the room with the tuning fork. The dog will still salivate even with no food. Now, after a while, you're going to get extinction if you continue to do this, and then the dog will figure out after a while, okay, I'm not going to get any food here. And after a while, the dog could stop salivating with the tuning fork. But for a while, because these two things were paired together, the tuning fork and the food, you could still present the tuning fork for a while without the food, and the dog will salivate. This is basically what he discovered. So in class, we're going to actually kind of do a little thing with stimulus response in advertising. What slogans have been paired with a particular product that we've learned to associate together? So, and we'll look at some of these, like such as the quicker picker upper, downy paper towels, or it's not delivery, it's DiGiorno, through hearing these advertisements either on YouTube, on television, seeing a billboard, or hearing on the radio or whatever. Now, we're going to get into some more other experiments on classical conditioning. Some of these were kind of unethical, and it's John Watson's Baby Albert experiment. This one was kind of odd. This happened later after Pavlov's experiments. So John Watson is able to get a hold of an 11-month-old infant called Baby Albert. Okay. And his experiment was to condition little Albert to fear laboratory rats. And he used a variety of animals with little Albert. I mean, he even let Albert for a while play with the rat. He really liked this little white rat, didn't scare him. But then he began to strike a very loud, annoying steel bar with a hammer eventually every time baby Albert got close to the rat. And the loud sound of that steel hitting, the sound of the hammer hitting the steel frightened Albert. And he consequently became very scared every time he saw a rat, even if the loud noise was not repeated. And even removing the loud noise, when the little rat got near him now, he was scared. Actually, eventually, he got scared when they even brought other animals to him. The kid learned to get scared with a lot, even bunny rabbits, whatever. So in this case, the um, the steel bar hitting the hammer was your unconditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus in this case was the rat. And then the conditioned response was Albert's fear. And psychologists today obviously would say this is really unethical. It taught a child to fear things that he didn't previously fear, but it did prove the point that you could condition fear as a response in people. And sadly, we'll watch a video about little Albert and what happened to him, but it's sad. He kind of lived a, short life, and he was psychologically damaged by this. So definitely would not do this experiment today, right? So, um, let's go a little bit more into advertising, how we're conditionally, you know, um, we're conditioned, classically conditioned through advertising. Um, and one of the things they actually were doing, and this was about 10, 15 years ago, Hardee's, or its Western version, Carl Jr., okay, paired a healthy, young, pretty model, like in the picture here, eating a very greasy, unhealthy triple cheeseburger with bacon on it and mayonnaise on it to attract male customers to buy it because they're seeing, wow, this beautiful model is eating this very unhealthy burger, but it was actually very effective because Hardee's sale of these monster burgers jacked up very high. I'm not going to show the commercials that went along with it because they're kind of very scandalous, I'll say that. But it did, the classical conditioning used, it did increase the sale of these burgers. Now, there's another one that's very interesting. It's called the Heart Attack Grill. And these were, I think the original one was in Arizona. Now they have one in Las Vegas, of all places, Sin City. It has scantily clad models dressed as naughty nurses, um, serving very horribly unhealthy burgers cooked in like with fries cooked in lard and quadruple bypass. Yeah, that's the name of the burger. The quadruple bypass, like four huge burger patties with mounds of cheese and bacon and mayonnaise on the burgers. The burgers may even be fried in lard too. But the guy that started this place, he calls himself a doctor. He was actually, I think, a dietitian who just got so frustrated with people eating unhealthy. He goes, "All right, you guys want unhealthy food? I'm going to give it to you." And sadly, some of the spokesmen for this place were like huge guys, like 400 or 500 plus pound people. One of them died of a heart attack, of all things. And you'll watch the video and you can kind of see um, what this idea of conditioning is meant here for the heart attack grill. Now, back in the day, they used to have cigarette advertisements. You don't see very much of these now. But classical conditioning here, they know this is an unhealthy product, especially by the 1970s. They were putting warning labels on cigarettes here. The Surgeon General has determined that cigarette smoking is dangerous for your health. But look what they would do. They would pair, good-looking people, you know with the cigarette in order to entice people to buy it. On a more maybe not as an unhealthy note, but even politicians will, when people feel like, I don't know if I trust politicians. Well, a lot of times, whether it's Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or in this case, Barack Obama, to get people to be enticed to their message, they will put like a slogan, change we can believe in. So you pair the politician with that, or with Donald Trump, make America great again, Joe Biden, build back better, whatever. Using those type of messaging with people kind of conditions them to kind of trust or vote for the person. It's been very effective psychologically. Or even McDonald's went through a major attack on its product about 20 years ago. There was a movie that came out, like a documentary movie called Super Size Me. And it was to show like how, Americans are just eating too much fast food. And McDonald's felt very attacked by that. And so they put out a nice, they did a couple things with themselves, like adding calories to counts to the menu, but also the slogan, I'm loving it. And pairing that slogan with the McDonald's symbol in many ways has kind of saved that company. And it's still going on. And here's another example here. Alcohol and tobacco manufacturers a lot of times will use this. Now, I don't know if you ever heard of the Marlboro Man. Let me go back to this one. Here's the Marlboro Man, manly ruggedness, even though smoking is horrible for your health, cowboys, see, you're smoking and see, it's a good thing. No, it's actually not. But again, advertisers have used classical conditioning to pair their products, you know, to sell. I think someone told me once, and I'm not sure if this is true, but the Marlboro Man from the 1970s here, I heard died of lung cancer. I don't know if that's true, but could be. Or, drinking a lot. Again, we're not going to attack moderate drinking or whatever, but it's kind of interesting. A lot of times they will use models or scenes of attractive young people all partying, like, hey, drinking is a positive thing, right? And a lot of times that'll show you later when you drink too much, you're, acting silly or just sick or dizzy lying down or whatever else comes from alcohol, drinking too much alcohol. But a lot of times they'll try to pair it present it as a positive thing. Again, classical conditioning is used. Another ways we're classically conditioned, it's kind of interesting, when you walk into a movie theater, in order to get you to buy popcorn, to spend extra money, the first thing a lot of times you smell is the smell of buttery popcorn. Now, maybe for some people that bothers them, a lot of people, it's a positive aroma and it makes them feel like, oh, wow, I want to buy some popcorn. I'm going to pair the enjoyment of watching a movie with spending mounds of money on that extra popcorn that you might want. The smell of coffee, a lot of times. Uh, People have been classically conditioned to actually even the memory of the smell of coffee scientifically established that it affects memory. Actually, this right here was one of my favorite coffees from the Dominican Republic, Café Monte Real. And it actually has like a chocolate aroma to it. And they do say the connection may be caused by the olfactory bulb and the olfactory system's ties to the brain actually may be connected to places of memory and emotion. So they do believe that there is some type of link to the hippocampus as well as the amygdala, which affects memory in our limbic system. So that could be working as well with classical conditioning. Thought that was interesting. Now, with drug addiction in classical conditioning, they have found that people in drug rehabs will frequently experience what we call withdrawal symptoms, known as abstinence syndrome, having intense cravings for the drug, and then quitting the drug all at once instead of tapering it off or gradually taking that drug away, is known as going cold turkey, will make the withdrawal symptoms even stronger. Former addicts often find that triggers, even after coming off the drug, finding triggers or cues that they once associated with the drug, such as the smell of a match burning, or the clink of bottles that they hear in a restaurant or even a bar, can reawaken their cravings that they were classically conditioned with, to have that drug or to have that drink. One study actually showed that former alcoholics will still salivate at the sight or smell of alcohol. This was a 1987 study. Psychologists will try to help recovering alcoholics and drug addicts to avoid these cues, try to be it not as much in restaurants that will serve alcohol, if possible, or try not to hang out with the people, sadly, in situations that they would have partied, you know. But you got to do what you got to do if you've been struggling with addiction. Avoiding these cues that you were classically conditioned with is a good route to treatment. Now, another thing in taste, in classical conditioning, is what we call taste aversion, and I'll share my experience with this. So basically, taste aversion is the loss of taste for food after having a bad experience with it. So, such as having nausea or food poisoning or stomach bug after having eaten a particular product. For me, it's hers sour cream and onion flavored potato chips. Yes, I know I probably didn't get sick from hers sour cream and onion potato chips, but I do remember one night watching a movie with my friends and my cousins, I think were there too, and we just ate a lot of sour cream and onion potato chips. Well, I woke up in the middle of the night and I threw up. And then I probably threw up for a full day or two afterwards. And now I realize, and my mom would tell me too, the same thing. You didn't get sick from the sour cream and onion chips. You had a stomach bug because everybody else leading up to this time was getting the stomach bug. And then even afterwards, my family caught a stomach bug and they didn't eat sour cream and onion chips that night. So, but Unfortunately, I had a conditioned aversion because that stomach bug was paired with the eating of the sour cream and onion chips. And so for years, I just like even seeing the sight of the bag, its greenness, all of it just reminds me of get how sick I got that time. And I've for years, um, I've really struggled with wanting to even eat sour cream and onion chips. I can take a like a plain potato chip and dip it in like a French onion or whatever dip, and no problem. That doesn't bother me. But the smell of even opening up a bag of sour cream and onion chips has bothered me for years. I've tried to eat a little bit since then. I had one student a few years back in psychology class actually go and buy a bag of hers chips to help me break my taste aversion. And I was able to take a couple chips. Still, like when they opened the bag, I still had a slight nausea, but I was able to eat two of the chips and I left it at that at baby steps. Maybe I'll try some later down the line. Is that wild? But that's how our brains work sometimes. John Garcia, a psychologist, actually did some experience with this with rats. And he discovered even rats can develop a taste aversion. So he had some flavored water that he gave the rats through like a little, like a little tube thing. And then he actually released radiation into their like area where they were drinking this flavored water. And so for a while there, they were drinking the flavored water. It was fine. And then the radiation was released. And then afterwards, of course, when the radiation was released, it was making, the rats feel sick, you know. And what really was, it wasn't the flavored water it was the radiation. But afterwards, when the rats were put in places without radiation, but given the flavored water, they wouldn't touch it. So the rats even learned to associate the flavored water with you know, with being sick, and they wouldn't touch it even without radiation. We call this the Garcia effect. And so here's even some examples with cancer patients, before any type of conditioning, we know that a lot of times um, chemotherapy drugs, it does produce nausea. Um, and so the first time, of course, cancer patients received the chemo, of course, they got nausea and even sick. And then they would go for the visits afterwards. What was even happening because they were in the particular place where they would go get the cancer treatments. Just being in the waiting room, even before getting the chemo drug, was starting to make them nauseous because they learned to associate, um, you know, being sick, having nausea, with getting this cancer drug. Then afterwards, very interesting, even without the drug, their condition just by being in certain waiting rooms, not like it could be going to another place and you're not going to even get chemo, but just being in a waiting room for them began to make them nauseous because of what they were conditioned with the cancer drug. So very interesting how that can work sometimes. That can be broken from you, but it's going to take some time and it could even take therapy for that to happen. So that covers classical conditioning. Now let's jump into operant conditioning. Works a little differently. So you know that classical conditioning centers around involuntary responses and then reflexes, right? Operant conditioning focuses more on voluntary actions we take to teach us that this is going to relieve pain, right? Or this is going to give us pleasure. So, for example, and you're usually conscious of operant conditioning. Classical conditioning, it may, for a while, you're not conscious of it. So, for example, a child learns that if he says, please, he gets a piece of candy. I'll do this behavior, I'll get pleasure, I'll have candy. Or someone suffering from a headache, oh, I gotta give this, I'm gonna have to do this action to get rid of it. I'll take aspirin or ibuprofen or whatever you take, right? Or you learn not to put your hand on a hot stove because one time you did, there's a reaction I get. Oh, it burned my hand. And so you learn and it's conscious not to put your hand on a hot stove, right? So, Pavlov, we know did, classical conditioning experiments, but you also have other behavioralists like Edward Thorndike and B.F. Skinner, who did experiments with operant conditioning. They still used animals, and they also realized that they too have reasoning abilities. So Thorndike actually did experiments with cats, and he used a hungry cat who needed a response to learn. He wanted to teach the cat to actually press like a pedal to get food. And he actually eventually trained the cat to do that to get its reward. And we call this the law of effect, right? So the cat, you'll see in the video I show in class, uses trial and error to figure out its way out of a particular box by pushing the lever to get fish for its food, and then he gets out of the box. And you'll see that in the video that we watch. And that's that video there. Another one, B.F. Skinner, has a really cool shaped head. It's like almost triangular with the hairstyle there. Um, he did studies with rats, and his concept that he came up with in operant conditioning is environmental determinism. So nurture a point of view, right? He does say, genetics exists, but he thought that was a non-factor in behavior. Again, he's learning that nurturing, teaching, that's the biggest thing that shapes behavior. And he believed that most of our behavior is somehow influenced by rewards and punishments and has very little effect from nature. So he's going to prove that by training rats to respond to different stimuli, often lights and sound, built into a special enclosure he calls the Skinner box. In order for rats to get food, they also had to press some type of lever. And then he got them to do what they wanted, right? So food represents the reinforcement. So he believes a lot of times in order to make someone do something you want them to do, you got to give them some type of reinforcement. So this box called the Skinner box or an operant chamber, scientifically validated too, that he could actually train any rat to do anything specific, amazing task even, like ride little carts and do certain things using food as the reinforcer. Here's like a picture of what that looked like. The reinforcement, again, is defined as a stimulus or event that follows a response and increases the likelihood that you're going to repeat the response. And people have done this as well. Baseball players are very famous for doing this, actually almost being to the point of superstitious, like licking a bat first before you get ready to go up and step to the plate, kissing the bat, wearing a certain sock for your baseball uniform a certain way. Now, in other cases beyond that, other superstitious behavior, people feel like that if you can avoid stepping on a crack on the sidewalk, you're going to have good luck. Or throwing salt over your shoulder to ward off evil spirits, or knock on wood, like a lot of those things have been even ingrained into our culture because people are like, I got to do this particular thing and bad things not going to happen to me, or a good thing will happen to me. And some incidents in the past may have accidentally reinforced those behaviors. It's possible, or just what you're taught through childhood. Again, operant conditioning is very, very much nurture rather than nature. So I'll show you this video of baseball players and their weird superstitions when they get ready to pitch or they get ready to bat or whatever. So here's kind of the layout of operant conditioning. So it's based on, again, two premises, reinforcements, but also we're going to look at punishments as well can shape behaviors. So when you're reinforcing a behavior, you're adding something valuable or desirable. Like we're going to give you a little star, like I do this, like for you guys, I'm like, okay, here's a little sticker for your 90 or above grade on a test or a quiz, right? Or here's a homework pass for you guys. I've added on a reinforcement because you guys did a great job, right? And also, you can have negative reinforcement too. You can avoid, in order to avoid something unpleasant, you cover up your eyes. See, I don't have to hear that, or I'm going to get out of this situation so I won't have to see that. That's also negative reinforcement. Now, with punishments, adding on something to somebody, you know, we're going to have you sit in the corner. I've added this punishment onto you in order to kind of shape your behavior and make you not do this again. We're going to put you in the corner. Or I'm going to add a fine to you now. And now these points are going to be on your license, right? Or you could have negative punishment. Sorry, getting your phone taken away. Sorry, you didn't listen to what I was going to have you do. Now you lose your phone, or you're going to lose this particular privilege. That's going to be taken away from you. Points will be taken away, or whatever. So again, negative and positive reinforcements, negative and positive punishments. Hopefully, we're going to practice some of that in class through some worksheets and activities. So let's break down again. Positive reinforcement is the increasing the chance that your individual will continue to behave in a certain way. So I'm going to say great job, or I'm going to give you a treat, or I'm going to give you a sticker, or maybe your parents, it's a hug, or maybe with your friends, it's more social approval because I like that guy, what he did there. I'm going to laugh at what he did. Or I'm going to say, man, you're a good friend. Thank you for that. Or here's a gift for you. Positive reinforcement. Negative, again, is an avoidance behavior, right? I don't want to see that, right? And again, it's to also strengthen that response. Or sometimes that negative reinforcement could be the car's annoying beeping sound. So you're like, I can't stand that annoying beeping sound. So I'm going to fasten my seatbelt, right? Right? Because I just don't want that. Or another avoidance behavior is if we see it raining, oh man, I'm just going to grab the umbrella because I don't want to be wet. I don't want to be rained on, right? Or you know what? I'm going to slow down because I don't want to get a speeding ticket, you know? So that's an avoidance behavior. And again, we're going to do this activity in class. So, but I'll give you a couple examples. So let's try to figure out between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. So again, that loud buzz in some cars when that ignition key is turned on, right? Or, you press the button and you might hear a buzz or a chime until you get that seatbelt on. Negative reinforcement. So in order to avoid the sound of that constant chime or buzz, you put your seatbelt on. But faking a stomach ache in order to avoid school. People will do that. That would also be an example of uh, negative reinforcement, right? You clean your room so that you can use the car for the evening. Negative reinforcement, right? Rushing home in the winter to get out of the cold, also negative reinforcement. Being nice to your brother so your parents will buy you a desired present. So you can see a lot of these are, you know, now this one is more positive reinforcement, right? So you're going to get, in this case, you're going to get a prize. You're going to get a reward. Cleaning the house to get rid of disgusting mess or cleaning the house. This is also a negative reinforcement here. Giving into an argument or to a child, dogs, begging, you know. I'll give it in. I'll give you what you want. Negative reinforcement. Studying for exam to avoid getting a poor grade. If you're doing it for that case, negative reinforcement. Waiting in line for 2 hours to see a famous movie star. Positive reinforcement, right? And I can keep going. So again, positive reinforcement you do to gain a positive thing. Negative reinforcement is an avoidance behavior. You're doing something to avoid this problem. Taking an aspirin to relieve a headache, a negative reinforcement. I know this can be a little confusing. Buying new clothes so that your friends will think you're fashionable, positive reinforcement, right? But if you're buying the new clothes so that your friends will stop making fun of you, that's an avoidance behavior, negative reinforcement, okay? Now, positive punishment. Again, doesn't mean that the punishment itself is positive. It means that you're adding on an unpleasant or aversive stimulus to make someone act a certain way or to reduce a bad behavior. Negative punishment is when you remove a pleasant stimulus like a phone to eliminate or decrease a certain behavior, right? So in operant conditioning, so you suspend a basketball player for committing a flagrant foul. So if you look back at this, so a suspension, you're adding on, right, a behavior or something to them as a punishment, right? So that is positive punishment. A soccer player rolls her eyes at a teammate. You're adding on that punishment, the eye roll to them. Scolding a child, again, you're adding on a punishment to them. You're scolding them. A prisoner loses their TV Now, that is a negative punishment because they're losing their TV privilege. It's still a punishment. The dog is sent to the doghouse. You're adding on that punishment. You're being sent to the doghouse. A child's technology time privileges are removed. So something has been removed from them. That is a negative punishment. And I can keep going, right? Now, when punishment is most effective or positive. Well, we know this through psychological studies and just studies of just parents with experience here when the consequence follows the response immediately. So, but if you punish somebody, oh, 2 weeks ago you did this, that punishment, yeah, it may be effective, but it will definitely be less effective. But if you're like literally, hey, son, you did this today. And I'm sorry, we have to deal with this right now. You're going to lose this privilege. The kid may not like that, but in the end, it may be more effective than if you waited weeks or months to punish them. Also, have a spiritual element to this. When it's done and led by the Holy Spirit through gentleness, fruits of the Spirit, mixed with some degree of grace and mercy, you're not punishing out of anger, rage, or ruthlessness. It can in the end bear good fruit in the end. But always especially when you become parents, guys, um, make sure you're asking the Holy Spirit to guide you in how to deal out consequences or punishments with your kids, you know. But if again you're doing it out of anger, definitely it could go the wrong way. And make sure whether, whatever punishments or consequences, that you're being consistent and fair. And there's a balance here with truth and grace. The truth is you did something that was totally dishonest and wrong. You're saying to your kid, okay, God doesn't approve of that. Okay. There's going to be a consequence. At the same time, you're not going to be so ruthless that you ground them for a year or something like that. For something that, okay, maybe you can ground them for a week or 2 weeks or something like that. So try to mix that. But God does that with us. And here's the negatives of using punishment, things we have to remember. Punished behavior is suppressed but not always forgotten, or punishment could teach discrimination, especially if you're discluding or somebody from something. Punishment could teach fear. So how you handle that, you don't want your kids, or in my case, my students as well, to be afraid of me constantly. I want them to respect me, but I don't want them to be scared physically of me. Physical punishment, if you go that route, um, could possibly increase aggression in the child, and they themselves could become aggressive if you're being aggressive in how you handle punishment with them. Again, this is why as Christians, we have to make sure when we're handing out punishments that it's a spirit-led thing and that, at the same time, we're helping our kids see not to be scared of, of their heavenly Father. Because sometimes in if we're dealing with punishments in a unspirit-led way, we don't want our kids to also feel that's how the Father handles things with us. The Father, I mean, Father God. We're going to do a little TV show analysis of positive and negative punishments and reinforcements, positive and negative, by looking at three TV clips of the older classic show from the 90s, Seinfeld, an early 2000s show called The Office, and then a little bit, maybe a 20 teens TV show called Big Bang Theory. And I think that may have even started in the early 2000s as well. We'll look at these. All right. So cognition and operant conditioning. So let's actually get into a couple other aspects of operant conditioning. There's one thing called insight learning, came up by a psychologist called Wolfgang Kohler. He's out of what we call the Gestalt School of Psychology, that perceptions are organized whole. He actually worked with chimpanzees to actually help them kind of figure out, can they also have operant conditioning? And they do. He also noticed that there was a stimulus response conditioning, but he didn't feel it was in itself responsible for all behavior. He felt that, yes, cognition is also responsible in how they learn. So he saw that. The chimp figured it by sudden realization that he can obtain a banana by actually using sticks and putting them together to drag that banana into its cage, or actually trying to lift up blocks and stack them to try to reach something. You'll see a video on this. Okay. Another aspect of learning is what we call learned helplessness and control. This is another aspect in psychology and learning. The idea here is called expectancy. It's the belief that animals and humans can learn only actions, not thoughts or expectations. So, again, theory based here, but Martin Seligman did some electroshock treatments with dogs, very unethical, who would give up trying to press a lever to get out of their cage. And then, because they couldn't figure out how to get out, they just were not hitting the right thing. And then they would give up trying to press the lever to get out and then curl up into the corner and start whimpering and do nothing after a while. And this led to what Seligman called learned helplessness. And he said, in many ways, people can be like that as well. Um, a spirit of learned helplessness, that they're continuing to experience painful, unpleasant, or aversive stimulus, and then they themselves become helplessness because no matter what they do, they feel it's futile. They feel like they're failing and failing and failing, that uncontrollable bad events come against them. They have a perceived lack of control over that. And then they just crawl up into a bowl and give up. And basically, yeah, there are cases with people like this. It could even be in school where a student feels without, and again, I'm saying without good supports, they keep trying and trying and they just give up after a while. And they're like, oh, well, what's the use? You know, screw this, forget it. And people can be like this. Again, without the proper supports, without the proper encouragement in their life, I do believe people can do this. Um, and there is a degree of truth here. Two examples of learned helplessness, and I'll show you a couple here. Some voters over time have felt that since they can't affect change in the nation, maybe the people that they voted for keep losing, or the political party they voted for keeps losing in the election, or maybe they have perceived corruption of the system too. They're like, "Well, forget this," or maybe they feel there's a lot of voter fraud or something like that. And that has happened in our history in the 1800s. There was some legitimate voter fraud going on in the cities. And some people felt like, well, why vote? It's just, I'm not going to get anything out of this. It's all fixed, it's all rigged in some way. That's how some people feel. So they developed almost a place of learned helplessness in their view toward politics. Or some people have gotten this in their view of looking for a job. There's people that have been unemployed and they keep searching for jobs, but they keep getting turned down. Or maybe it's their lack of skills, and they feel like they can't improve that, or they don't, it's their lack of connection. So they, in a sense, curl up into a ball and give up looking. And again, like I said, some students have felt like this trying in school due to repeated failures. After a while, they give up and they don't try anymore. So, a lot of times, psychologists have felt when they studied this, all right, okay, so this happens. So what's behind this learned helplessness? Like basically, and they come up with two things. And I think some of this is biblical. Some of this can be applied. And it's basically one's feeling of an external locus of control versus an internal locus of control. So basically, an external locus of control is peace. Some people believe that we have little or no control over our lives or what other people do. So life is about chance, luck, or even fate. So why try in that case? There are some people that will approach it that way. Some will approach life with more what we call an internal locus of control, that we believe that we do have the ability within maybe ourselves, our own lives, or our choices, and the world, and we can affect change in some way. We can influence people. We can influence situations. We can change our mindset, maybe, and maybe we can get out of that state of learned helplessness, right? So, and a lot of it could be the view of basically having that idea of self-control, the ability maybe to delay satisfaction of immediate desires for a long-term benefit. Maybe I need to hold back in this particular situation. And even though I want it and I want it now, but maybe in this case, I can delay that satisfaction and trust that I'll have a long-term benefit. Maybe I can wait and maybe focus on a certain thing now, right? And it does tend to be more effective in addressing behavior problems if you can help somebody develop self-control. And maybe it can tend to lead to greater happiness, or maybe avoiding a particular thing that has caused you great pain and develop a self-control in your desires for it. This is very biblical stuff. Again, this fruit of the spirit is self-control. That's one of those, right? So the word of God in strengthening your self-control is very apparent here. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. So you don't have any self-control in your life, man. You could be easily attacked by the enemy in your life. You're open to that. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. How about that? That's out of Galatians 5:22 through 23. Or Paul writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:7, for God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. But I'm telling you, if we're cowering in fear and having that learned helplessness, you are open to spiritual attack. But if you are giving into the Holy Spirit, you do have a power of protection over your life. You are covered by the love of Jesus. And if you are walking in self-control of your life, you're able to resist your own flesh, your own desires in you that want to react contrary to the Spirit, and you're able to resist the attacks of the enemy on your life, at least the things that he wants to throw at you. So, self-control, having that internal locus of control, if you will, it's very effective. And so this is where we can actually kind of meld um, the spiritual and psychology together. Now, what about coping mechanisms? How about this one? This is another thing in dealing with maybe learned behaviors and the mindset of both of these. Again, very biblical. There's what we call problem focused coping. That's taking control of a situation by changing our behavior or the situation, or we would call emotion focused coping. That's seeking out support of others and trying to see the positive side of a stressor or taking your mind off the problem or having maybe a change in your mindset or your heart. It is kind of sometimes hard to just change your behavior if you're not getting down to the root of that behavior, right? Emotion focused coping, I think, helps deal more with the mindset behind that behavior or our heart. What's maybe there's something in our heart that we still need to give over to the Holy Spirit, or we need to change that needs to be changed. Then the behavior will be changed. I tend to focus more on the emotion focused coping. So actually, let's look at this. Iron sharpens iron as one man sharpens another. This is out of Proverbs 27:17. Hang out with those who will sharpen you, not be toxic to you. And again, this focus more on emotion focused coping. Seeking out people who are going to sharpen you, you know. That's huge. And again, using alcohol, drugs, sex, overeating, using video games, binge watching TV programs, that's not going to solve your problem. Actually, these things could be what we consider maladaptive solutions to problems. So, but focusing on more like, all right, why am I seeking these things to solve my problems instead? Maybe there's a part of my heart that needs to change. And then I won't get into maladaptive solutions to problems. So, and again, here's just like a graphic that shows you. And again, I don't think all the problem focused coping skills are or bad necessarily, but a lot of times some of these other ones are actually better focused. All right, in class, we're going to get into Bobo Dial, and this is the final aspect of learning, and we're going to get into Albert Bandura's um, experiments, learning by observation. So Albert Bandura, um, kind of more focused on what we would call social learning theory. This is back in the 1960s. This is a psychologist who conducted a study to show that children learn aggressive behavior by watching someone else. So we don't just learn by our own experiences of certain things. Sometimes he's saying we also learn by watching others do things. Ah, they do that. I'm going to do that. Or they do that and they get something out of that. I'm going to do that. So we call this the social learning theory. Again, it's a form of observational learning, watching or mimicking others. There was an old term people used to use called monkey see, monkey do. And it's the idea of what we call modeling, showing how something is done. And that can be done positive and negative. He actually disagreed with B.F. Skinner. He said behaviors can also be learned, not just in a own context, but he said it's social context and has a cognitive basis. So he said there's both going on. So again, he said, here's the elements that need to be present in social learning. There has to be a model, a person or whatever doing something, and there has to be obviously an observer viewing the model's behavior. He called this vicarious learning, learning by watching. And then thirdly, he goes the observing, viewing the consequences of the behavior. The vicarious reinforcement needs to somehow be present. So the child viewing his mother's praise for being nice to the dog, as an example. So that has to happen. So not just he's watching his mother being nice to the dog. The kid's got to be nice to the dog, and he's got to have a reinforcement for that. So this was done through what we call the Bobo doll experiment. I don't have a Bobo doll, but I do have a Bozo doll, which is kind of very similar, and we'll look at that in class. So we follow modeled behavior, again, is the idea behind this. And observational learning, very effective. And what happens is the kids watch for a while, a woman pounding around and knocking over um, what we call a Bobo doll, which is this inflatable doll that you hit it down, but it keeps coming back up. and we'll watch a video about that. Um, and basically, what the kids kind of learned from it as they watched this, they learned that, oh, wow, the adults are sitting there beating up that thing. And they go into a room eventually, even with other toys there. But the Bobo doll is, they begin to actually beat down the Bobo doll itself, even at some point, even hitting it with like a mallet. Um, and again, they even saw the adult before they went in there, like literally straddling the doll and punching it, and they began to do those things. And it didn't matter if they were boys or girls, both of them were doing that. So it shows all of us learn that way. So, cognitive behavior therapies, again, this is another idea of learning, but this is based on now how do we help people learn better ways to react to situations. So, behavior therapies. Again, some of them are using classical conditioning techniques, some of them are using operant conditioning techniques. And the idea is to unlearn maladaptive behaviors, change the behavior, and then you can solve the psychological or spiritual problem. But again, one of the biggest core things, if you're helping them maybe having a spiritual element to solving this problem, it's definitely getting down to what the heart issue was as well as the mind issue. So you can do what we call counter conditioning. So that's what we call exposure therapies to help them maybe reduce anxiety, the phobia or fear that they learned somehow. They've done this through what we call systematic desensitization of the stimulus. John Wolpe helped them do this. So basically, the use of today, it's actually being used of virtual reality or graded exposure therapy. So people that have been scared of driving, actually putting on goggles, and on that virtual reality, they can actually experience driving without having to get into the car first. The use of flooding, full exposure to the fear stimuli in the exposure environment as well to help them kind of just feel like they're right in that car at that moment. And but they don't have the risk of actually being in the real car and getting into an accident. But at least having the virtual reality used in that can help them with that. And we'll watch a video on the use of VR in therapy. It's been pretty effective. Operant conditioning behavior therapies, again, B.F. Skinner came up with some of these, is modeling, very practical. Therapists will sit down, model the desired behaviors themselves, used in, especially in overcoming fears, um, using what we call a token economy or tokens, rewards earned for performing a desired behavior. A lot of mental hospitals will use this in group therapies, and they'll say, hey, if we actually participate today in the group therapy, you're going to have extra time in the kitchen to make your sandwich, or you'll get some extra candies, or you'll have extra time on the computer, or something like that. Now, there are criticisms because how durable are the behaviors, you know, that they can try to teach them to do? And is it right for one human to control another's behavior through modeling punishment rewards? Some people feel that might be getting a little bit toward mind control and you're not really getting to the heart issue. But they also have found that behavior therapies may not necessarily be efficient for people in limiting some symptoms of severe depression or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder because not all these behaviors are necessarily, things that they've learned. It could be neurological issues that are making the person do what they're doing. It could be chemical imbalances. So that like behavior therapies and using token economies and rewards, it may not be effective for things that you're going to have to treat chemically rather. Um, and here's another thing to kind of consider in trying to help people with issues that they've learned or whatever, or even any type of mental issues, is pursue health rather than simply avoiding the mental illness. So you can't just remove psychological pain or the problem without maybe dealing with an underlying sin, maybe, or an underlying something that's going on in their heart. Again, not all psychological issues are related to sin, but some may be. So how do you deal with that? Might have to get to the heart issue of why the person is doing that. And here's another thing is natural logical consequences can lead us to repentance. That's another thing to consider. And focus on what can make us mentally well than just what made us mentally ill. So focusing on joy, focusing on peace, kindness, and thankfulness, growing in the fruits of the Spirit, and again, these things can help us make us mentally well. Then let's focus on practicing in those things. And those could be therapeutic in many ways. Celebrate Recovery Ministry is a ministry that works with a lot of churches. Um, and again, it's not just for people who are on drugs or have alcohol issues. That's actually a grace-filled community of strugglers who courageously enter safe and a beautiful space in group therapy to get honest about the pain in their life, the negative ways they see themselves, maybe the negative ways they see God, maybe the negative ways they see others around them. In the process, they come to accept that some of the habits that they've developed to accept their pain may have hurt them and may have hurt people close to them. And it's a biblically based approach to help achieve long-lasting recovery by healing their hurts, guiding them into new healthy truths, and developing life-giving habits. So again, it's the idea going back here is to focus on what can make them mentally well and spiritually well as well. And so they have basically like a 12-step idea and how it's very biblical. And it's a pretty good program. It's almost a little bit like, actually Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know if you're familiar with that group. That was actually based on some biblical principles originally. Of course, today it's more of a secular based thing, but Celebrate Recovery definitely adds a spiritual element to help people unlearn some behaviors that have gotten them into some the negative consequences that go with that. All right, so that is learning. So hopefully you got an idea what classical conditioning is, the ideas that go with that, the stimulus and response, that you also learned about operant conditioning, the reinforcements of behaviors, maybe punishments and negative and positive reinforcements that go with that. Um, as well as hopefully you got into the idea of social learning and you understood that, and some of the solutions and therapies people have put out to try to correct or treat or deal with certain behaviors. Okay. All right, guys. Have a good day and God bless you.